In the heart of the American South, within the historic town of Monroeville, Alabama, a courtroom's dim lighting casts long shadows, reflecting the deep-seated prejudices that linger in its corners. 18-year-old Marcus Johnson, a young black man with a promising future, stands accused of a crime he did not commit. The air is thick with tension, as Judge Beauregard Harrington III, known for his unyielding demeanor and whispered biases, presides over the proceedings. Despite compelling evidence pointing to Marcus's innocence, the gavel strikes with a resounding finality. 5 years in the state penitentiary, the judge declares, his voice void of empathy. Marcus's eyes, wide with disbelief, lock onto the judge's, a silent promise of reckoning burning within them. From the back of the courtroom, a heart-wrenching cry pierces the heavy silence. Evelyn Johnson, Marcus's mother, collapses to her knees, her pleas for justice echoing off the cold and indifferent walls. Tears stream down Marcus's face as he leans forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You regret this, Your Honor." Unnoticed by many, a young girl of 15 watches the scene unfolds, her expression a tapestry of conflict and unease. Lillian Harrington, the judge's daughter, feels the weight of her father's decision settle heavily on her conscience, planting seeds of doubt that will grow in the years to come. In a world where justice wears a blindfold, what becomes of the innocent condemned? Journey with us as we unravel the tangled threads of fate, prejudice, and retribution that bind two families across time. Stay with us, for the revelations that await are as shocking as they are inevitable. Reading copy of the film for Mother's Day. Moment transits to a bright sunlit neighborhood, vibrant with the sound of children playing and the soft hum of a hopeful community. A young boy, no older than 17, walks briskly down the sidewalk, his backpack weighed down not just by books but by the promise of a better tomorrow. His name is Marcus Johnson, and he was destined for greatness. Or so he thought. Marcus Johnson was the kind of young man every mother dreams of raising. Ambitious, intelligent, and compassionate, he carried the hopes of his family and his community on his narrow but determined shoulders. He dreamed of standing in courtrooms one day, not as a defendant, but as a defender of truth and justice. The moment shifts to a small, modest kitchen, where Marcus's mother, Evelyn Johnson, carefully packs his lunch. Her face is worn with the marks of a life spent working tirelessly, but her eyes shine with pride. A younger girl, Marcus's sister Tasha, sits at the table, watching him with admiration as he reviews a scholarship application. Raised by a single mother who worked long hours as a nurse, Marcus had learned early that life demanded resilience. Every scholarship application, every late-night study session, was a step closer to his dream of becoming a lawyer, of breaking the cycle of struggle his family had known for generations. The moment darkens, and the sound of distant sirens pierces the air. The light dims as Marcus's voice echoes faintly, his words filled with hope and promise. "One day, I'll make sure no one is ever wrongfully accused." But dreams often shatter in the face of injustice. The moment transits to a different part of Monroeville, a luxurious estate perched high above the rest of the town, its sprawling grounds a stark contrast to Marcus's modest home. Inside, a middle-aged man in a finely tailored suit pours himself a glass of bourbon. Judge Beauregard Harrington III, a man whose power and influence cast long shadows over the town, watches the sunset through his office window. Judge Beauregard Harrington III was a man of legacy. In Monroeville, his name carried weight. His rulings shaped lives, and his reputation, though pristine on the surface, was built on a foundation of quiet corruption. To many, he was a symbol of justice, but to those who knew him, he was a man who would do anything to protect his family's name. The moment transits to Harrington sitting across from his teenage son, Cole Harrington. Cole's smirk carries the arrogance of privilege. The two share a tense conversation over a desk strewn with papers, a stolen watch gleaming faintly in the dim light. It was Cole Harrington, the judge's son, who would set in motion the events that would destroy Marcus's life. Reckless and entitled, Cole and his best friend Tyler Simmons orchestrated an armed robbery at Garrison's jewelry store, a high-end establishment in Monroeville. But when the crime threatened to expose them, they knew their escape lay in a single scapegoat. The sound of a locker slamming shut echoes as Marcus's face appears on screen, bewildered as officers handcuff him in the middle of the school hallway. Around him, students gasp and whisper, their eyes filled with confusion and pity. Marcus Johnson, who had never so much as stolen a pencil, was arrested on charges of armed robbery. The evidence? A stolen watch planted in his locker, and witnesses coerced by the real culprits. It didn't matter that he was innocent. What mattered was that he fit the narrative Judge Harrington needed to protect his son. The courtroom is dimly lit, the tension thick as Marcus stands at the defendant's table. Across the room, Judge Harrington's gavel strikes like a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. In that courtroom, Marcus's fate was sealed before the trial even began. Judge Harrington, the very man sworn to uphold justice, ensured that Marcus would pay the price for his son's crime. 5 years in state penitentiary. A boy with dreams of becoming a lawyer was now just another statistic. The sound of a woman's anguished cries fills the room as the camera pans to Evelyn Johnson, clutching her chest, as though her heart had been ripped from her body. Evelyn Johnson's pleas for justice echoed through the courtroom, falling on deaf ears. And as Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he turned to face the man who had condemned him. Through tear-filled eyes, he whispered words that would haunt Judge Harrington. "You'll regret this, Your Honor." But there was one person in that courtroom who felt the weight of what had just happened. Lillian Harrington, Lily to those close to her, was only 15 years old. But even at that young age, she understood that her father, the man she had once idolized, had chosen to protect his son at the expense of an innocent life. But there was one witness to the controversy. Lily, to those close to her, was only 15 years old. Cut to Harrington Estate. Lily sits at the edge of her bed, the muffled sound of her father's voice seeping through the walls. His words are sharp, his tone commanding. Late one night, Lily overheard a conversation that would forever change the way she saw her father. He spoke of Marcus's case, admitting to suppressing evidence, to protecting the wrong people. For Lily, the revelation was devastating. The moment transits to Lily volunteering at a community center, her hands trembling as she reads a pamphlet about Marcus's case. A rally forms outside, led by Evelyn Johnson, whose voice trembles with conviction. Lily began to question everything she had been taught. The girl who had lived in privilege and comfort could no longer ignore the cracks in her father's legacy. She began to read, to research, to listen to the voices of those who had been silenced. Back to Marcus, sitting in a cold, dimly lit prison cell. He holds a photograph of his mother and sister, his eyes filled with determination. Injustice has a way of planting seeds. Seeds of doubt. Seeds of resolve. For Marcus Johnson, his 5 years behind bars would become a crucible, a time to prepare for the fight of his life. And for Lily Harrington, the truth she uncovered would set her on a collision course with the very man who had raised her. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it takes everything. But when the innocent rise and the guilty fall, the truth will always demand its price. Back to Marcus in prison. The clang of steel doors echoed behind Marcus as he stepped into the belly of the beast, a place where hope came to die. The state penitentiary, known simply as Ironwood, loomed like a fortress of despair. Its walls, weathered by decades of misery, bore silent witness to countless stories of broken lives. For Marcus Johnson, however, this was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning. The moment shifts to Marcus being led down a stark, fluorescent-lit hallway, his wrists shackled, his eyes scanning the faces of hardened men watching him from behind their bars. Marcus entered Ironwood as a boy, with a brilliant mind and a heart full of promise. But the prison had little use for either. The first few weeks were the hardest. Threats came from every direction: guards, inmates, even the oppressive silence of solitary confinement. The weight of injustice bore down on him, heavier than the chains he wore. Each night, as he lay on the thin cot in his cell, Marcus thought of his mother and sister. He thought of the dreams he once had, the courtroom where his future had been stolen, and the judge whose gavel had slammed the door on his freedom. But even as the anger threatened to consume him, there was a flicker of something stronger: hope. To have for himself, for her family, and the world. It had been too long since anything in the world had smiled on him. Each night, as he lay asleep in his cell, he thought of the dreams he once had, the ones he'd never really told anyone about, and the dreams had sent him back to sleep. Marcus entered Ironwood as a boy with a brilliant mind and a heart full of promise, but the prison had little use for either. The first few weeks were the hardest. Threats came from every direction: guards, inmates, even the oppressive silence of solitary confinement. The weight of injustice bore down on him, heavier than the chains he wore. The narrative softens, focusing on Marcus's inner struggle. Each night, as he lay on the thin cot in his cell, Marcus thought of his mother and sister. He thought of the dreams he once had, the courtroom where his future had been stolen, and the judge whose gavel had slammed the door on his freedom. But even as the anger threatened to consume him, there was a flicker of something stronger: hope. The moment transitions to Marcus sitting at a small desk in his cell, poring over a battered law textbook, his brow furrowed in concentration. Hope came in the form of knowledge. Marcus spent hours in the prison library, devouring every law book and legal case he could get his hands on. He taught himself the language of the system that had wronged him, determined to find a way to prove his innocence. He wrote letter after letter to organizations that fought for the wrongfully convicted. Though most went unanswered, he refused to stop. The focus shifts to Marcus's unlikely ally, a grizzled man named Levi, his cellmate. Marcus's resilience caught the attention of Levi, a reformed gang member who had spent over a decade in Ironwood. Levi had seen countless young men broken by the system. But there was something different about Marcus, something unshakable. Over time, a quiet bond formed between them, and Levi began to teach Marcus the skills he needed to survive. Levi's lessons weren't found in books. They were carved from years of experience. He taught Marcus how to defend himself, how to read the room, how to spot danger before it struck. Under Levi's guidance, Marcus honed his body as well as his mind, transforming himself into a man who could endure whatever the prison threw at him. The moment sharpens as the scene transitions to a violent confrontation in the prison yard. Turn evening, as Marcus walked across the yard, a fight erupted between two rival gangs. It began as a war of words but escalated quickly into chaos. Blades were drawn, fists flew, and Marcus found himself caught in the middle. He tried to move away, to avoid the storm, but the storm found him. A man lunged at Marcus, a crude knife glinting in the sunlight. Instinct took over. Marcus ducked, the blade narrowly missing his chest, and countered with a swift strike to the attacker's ribs. The movements were fluid, calculated, muscle memory from months of practice with Levi. Another attacker came at him, and Marcus pivoted, using the man's momentum against him, sending him sprawling to the ground. The pace slows briefly, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. The riot raged on around him, but Marcus moved with precision, not out of rage, but survival. When the dust finally settled and the guards regained control, Marcus stood among the chaos, blood staining his shirt but his resolve unbroken. He had defended himself not with anger, but with the strength of a man who refused to be defeated. That day in the yard marked a turning point. Marcus entered Ironwood as a boy, but he emerged from that riot as something more, hardened by his circumstances, but not defined by them. His principles remained intact, but his spirit was now forged in steel. He was no longer just surviving, he was preparing. The focus shifts inward, back to Marcus in his cell, where he writes a letter late into the night. Through the months and years that followed, Marcus became a force to be reckoned with, not through violence, but through his unyielding will. He continued to study, to write, to fight in his own way, and though the system sought to break him, he held fast to the one thing they could never take: his belief in justice. In the crucible of Ironwood, Marcus Johnson was tested and transformed. He learned to survive, to fight, to endure. But most importantly, he learned to believe in himself. For even in the darkest of places, a flicker of light can grow into a blaze, and Marcus was determined to shine brighter than the walls that sought to contain him. Beyond the unforgiving walls of Ironwood, the world kept turning. Time moved forward, dragging with it the weight of choices made and lives altered. For Judge Beauregard Harrington, those 5 years brought accolades and advancement, but also shadows that whispered of unfinished business. For Lillian Harrington, they brought something far more haunting: the quiet, unrelenting voice of her conscience. At 18, Lily Harrington had the kind of life most people envied: wealth, education, and every opportunity at her fingertips. But privilege, she discovered, could feel like a prison of its own. The guilt she carried had grown heavier with each passing year, suffocating in its silence. The image of Marcus Johnson being led away in handcuffs was etched into her mind, a constant reminder of her father's complicity in destroying an innocent life. The story transitions to Lily's college years, where she chooses to study sociology, much to her father's dismay. College offered Lily an escape from the suffocating world of her father's expectations. It was there, in a class on social justice, that she began to learn about the system her family had benefited from and the countless lives it had crushed. The more she read, the more the pieces of Marcus's case fell into place, and the more she understood, the harder it became to ignore the growing chasm between who her father claimed to be and who he truly was. One afternoon at a campus volunteer fair, Lily's eyes lingered on a booth for a legal aid organization. Their sign read, "Fighting for the Wrongfully Convicted." She hesitated, her hand hovering over the sign-up sheet, as if crossing that line would cement her betrayal of her father. But something stronger than fear compelled her forward. That moment, small as it seemed, was the beginning of her quiet rebellion. The moment shifts to Lily's involvement in the organization, her transformation beginning to take shape. Lily spent evenings sorting case files, researching precedents, and reading letters from inmates pleading for help. Each story chipped away at the walls her father had built around her understanding of justice. But it wasn't just the work that changed her. It was the people she met. One of them was Jamal. Jamal first attracted his attention when he first moved in with her after his release, and when she met Lily, her first son took, her heart eventually closing. Jamal Carter was everything Lily wasn't: confident, outspoken, and unafraid to confront uncomfortable truths. A volunteer at the organization, he was passionate about dismantling the systemic racism that had shaped his own life. At first, Lily admired him from a distance, drawn to his intensity, but unsure how to approach him. But as their paths crossed more often, admiration grew into something deeper. The moment grows tender, capturing the beginnings of their relationship. Jamal saw through Lily's polished exterior to the turmoil underneath. Their conversations, once casual, became vulnerable. She confessed her guilt about her father's actions, though she never revealed the full truth. He spoke of his own struggles, of the cousin who had been unfairly imprisoned for years on trumped-up charges. In those moments, they found solace in each other, two souls searching for meaning in a world that often felt unjust. The romantic moment unfolds as the two sit on the steps of the courthouse late one evening. Under the dim glow of a street lamp, Jamal told Lily the story of his cousin, Derek, a promising artist whose life had been stolen by a corrupt judge who turned a blind eye to the truth. Lily's heart clenched with recognition, though she said nothing. Instead, she reached for Jamal's hand, her touch saying what her words could not. In the silence that followed, the weight of their unspoken truths bound them closer than ever. While Lily was quietly unraveling the threads of her father's legacy, Judge Harrington's star continued to rise. He was appointed to the State Court of Appeals, a position that came with greater prestige but also greater scrutiny. The people of Monroeville admired him, or at least, they appeared to. Beneath the surface, murmurs of discontent were growing louder. It began with a letter, folded neatly and left on the judge's desk. Its message was simple: "I know what you did." At first, Harrington dismissed it as the work of a disgruntled defendant or an idle prank. But the letters kept coming, each one more specific, more chilling. "You sent an innocent boy to prison to protect your son. Justice always comes." The moment intensifies, reflecting the judge's growing paranoia. For him, it's the first and only time he's felt danger. He can't help but feel safer, closer to God. Harrington's once unshakable confidence began to erode. He doubled the security at his home, avoided public appearances, and even confided in his closest ally, the district attorney. But no amount of precautions could silence the nagging feeling that his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. The moment draws a parallel between Harrington's growing unease and Lily's quiet defiance. As the judge tightened his grip on his power, Lily loosened hers on the truth. She began to see her father not as an untouchable figure, but as a man whose choices had ruined lives. And though she had yet to confront him, the day was coming when silence would no longer be an option. Two lives moving in opposite directions, one clinging desperately to a crumbling facade, the other breaking free of it. But the shadow of Marcus Johnson loomed over them both, a reminder that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. 5 years, 1,826 days to be exact. That's how long Marcus Johnson endured the steel embrace of a system designed to break him. But justice has a way of creeping through even the smallest cracks, and on the morning of his release, freedom felt both overdue and bittersweet. Marcus stood at the gates of Ironwood Penitentiary, his shoulders squared against the early morning chill. The weight of 5 lost years hung heavy on his frame, but his expression was unreadable. In his hand, a crumpled photo of his late mother, Evelyn Johnson, whose strength had kept him going until it couldn't anymore. Evelyn had passed away 2 years into Marcus's sentence, her heart giving out under the strain of her grief. As Marcus stepped into the sunlight, the world felt both too familiar and completely foreign. The nonprofit organization that had fought tirelessly for his release stood waiting, their faces full of hope and pride. But Marcus barely acknowledged them. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, his mind already turning toward what came next. The moment slows, growing reflective. Marcus left prison with more than just his freedom. He carried anger. Anger at a system that had stolen his future, at a judge who had betrayed the very concept of justice, and at the criminals who had walked free while he bore the blame. But he also carried something else, a resolve that burned hotter than his rage. Marcus had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, and now it was time to act. Back in Monroeville, Marcus began piecing together the fragments of his stolen life. The nonprofit had uncovered enough evidence to secure his release, but Marcus knew the truth ran deeper than what the courts were willing to admit. Armed with newfound knowledge and a quiet determination, he started his own investigation. It began with whispers, rumors about the judge's son, Cole Harrington, and his role in the robbery that had upended Marcus's life. The moment tightens, introducing tension as Marcus digs into the past. Marcus's search led him to old connections, people who had once crossed paths with Cole Harrington and his accomplice Tyler Simmons. Each conversation brought him closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. Marcus knew that exposing the Harringtons wouldn't just clear his name, it would destroy a legacy. And legacies are fiercely protected. The deeper Marcus dug, the clearer the picture became. Witnesses who had testified against him admitted to being coerced. Evidence that could have exonerated him had been buried. And at the center of it all was Judge Beauregard Harrington III, a man who had manipulated the system to shield his son from consequences. Marcus had suspected the judge's involvement for years, but now he had proof. And with that proof came a choice, or take matters into his own hands. But Marcus wasn't the only one uncovering the truth. Word of his investigation reached the Harrington family, and the judge, now a state appellate court figure, realized the precariousness of his position. Harrington wasn't just protecting his son anymore, he was protecting himself. As Marcus walked through the back streets of downtown Monroeville, a chill in the air warned him he wasn't alone. Footsteps echoed faintly behind him, growing louder as he quickened his pace. Then, the attack came. A black SUV screeched to a halt in front of Marcus, blocking his path. Before he could react, two men emerged from the shadows, their movements swift and calculated. One swung a pipe, aiming for Marcus's head, but 5 years in prison had sharpened his reflexes. He ducked, countering with a punch that sent the man staggering. The second attacker lunged with a knife, but Marcus sidestepped, grabbing a nearby trash can lid and using it as a shield. The tension tightens, the fight growing more intense. The struggle was brutal and chaotic, but Marcus fought with the precision of a man who had everything to lose. The attackers weren't ordinary thugs. Their movements were too coordinated, their intent too deliberate. This was a warning, sent by someone who wanted Marcus silenced before he could uncover more. In the end, Marcus stood bloodied but victorious. The attackers fled, limping back into the darkness, but their message was clear. Marcus wasn't just fighting for his own justice anymore. He was challenging a system that protected the powerful at the expense of the innocent. A day later that night, as Marcus wiped the blood from his hands, he realized something profound. Justice wouldn't come to him. He would have to take it, piece by piece, no matter the cost. And as the stars blinked faintly above Monroeville, Marcus Johnson made a promise to himself. No more running, no more hiding. The truth would come to light, and those who had stolen his life would face the reckoning they so desperately feared. Justice is not a quiet force. It doesn't creep softly through the corridors of power. It crashes in, shattering the silence and exposing the lies. For Marcus Johnson, justice was no longer an abstract ideal. It was a weapon, and he was ready to wield it. Marcus had spent weeks tracking the threads of deceit that bound Judge Harrington and his son. Every lead brought him closer to the truth and closer to danger. Through the nonprofit organization that had helped secure his release, Marcus uncovered court documents, buried testimonies, and surveillance footage that painted a damning picture. The judge's influence stretched farther than Marcus had imagined. But no wall of power was impenetrable. The moment heated Marcus cornered Cole in the parking lot of an upscale restaurant, the rain pounding down as if to cleanse the filth of their shared history. Cole barely recognized Marcus at first, his expression shifting from confusion to fear as the realization hit him. The moment tightens, the tension thick. "You ruined my life," Marcus said, his voice steady but laced with fury. Cole tried to run, but Marcus was faster, cutting him off and forcing him against the wall. The rain slicked their faces as Cole stammered excuses, but Marcus wasn't here for apologies. He wanted the truth. The pace quickens as Marcus pushes Cole to the edge. Under the weight of Marcus's rage and determination, Cole broke. His confession spilled out, every detail a nail in the coffin of his father's reputation. Cole admitted to the robbery, to planting the evidence, and to his father's role in burying the truth. But before Marcus could press further, headlights pierced the darkness, and an unmarked car roared into the lot. Marcus had anticipated retaliation, but he hadn't expected it to come so quickly. The car screeched to a halt, and two men emerged, armed and ready to silence both Marcus and Cole. Without hesitation, Marcus grabbed Cole and pulled him toward his car. The engine roared to life, and the chase began. The streets of Monroeville became a battlefield, tires screeching as Marcus weaved through traffic with the precision of a man who had nothing to lose. The attackers pursued relentlessly, their bullets shattering glass and sparking off metal. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel, his focus unshakable. He couldn't let them win, not now, not when the truth was within reach. The tension peaks as Marcus executes a daring maneuver. In a calculated risk, Marcus led his pursuers into an abandoned industrial yard. There, using the terrain to his advantage, he outmaneuvered them, sending their car crashing into a stack of steel drums. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the rain and the hum of Marcus's engine. The attackers were down, but the fight was far from over. Unbeknownst to Marcus, someone else had been following his trail. Lily Harrington had pieced together enough of Marcus's actions to understand he was seeking vengeance, though she didn't yet know why. Determined to stop what she believed was a descent into violence, she confronted Marcus at a safe house where he was preparing for his next move. "You can't do this," Lily said, her voice trembling as she blocked Marcus's path. Marcus stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he considered brushing past her, but something in her eyes gave him pause. That pause was enough for Lily to see the pain beneath his anger. As Lily pressed him for answers, the truth came out. She learned that Marcus was the boy her father had wronged, the boy who had been imprisoned for her brother's crime. The weight of her father's sins crushed her, but in that moment, Lily made a choice. She would no longer stand by and let injustice go unanswered. She would help Marcus bring the truth to light. The stage was set for the final act, a high-profile gala celebrating Judge Harrington's illustrious career. The room was filled with Monroeville's elite, their laughter and champagne masking the corruption that had built their world. But Marcus wasn't here to celebrate. He was here to expose the man who had stolen his life. Clad in a simple black suit, Marcus moved through the crowd like a shadow. In his pocket was a flash drive containing every piece of evidence he had gathered. At his side was Lily, her resolve as strong as his. Together they approached the stage, where Judge Harrington stood, basking in the glow of admiration. The moment ignites as Marcus takes the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning to the man they didn't recognize. "Tonight, you're celebrating a man who claims to represent justice, but I'm here to tell you the truth about Beauregard Harrington." The judge's hired enforcers moved quickly, but Marcus was faster. Chaos erupted as they tried to silence him, the room devolving into a battlefield. Marcus fought with the precision and strength forged in prison, his movements a symphony of skill and purpose. Lily, too, played her part, using her knowledge of the room to help Marcus evade capture. The fight reaches its climax as Marcus faces Judge Harrington directly. Amid the chaos, Marcus stood before the judge, his eyes blazing with fury. Harrington's veneer of confidence cracked as Marcus held up the flash drive. "Justice isn't mine to give," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "It's the truth that will destroy you." And with that, Marcus walked away, leaving the crowd to witness the fallout. In the end, justice wasn't a single act, it was a series of choices, of sacrifices, of truths brought to light. Marcus Johnson didn't seek revenge. He sought redemption, for himself and for a system that had failed him. And as the walls of power crumbled around Judge Harrington, the echoes of Marcus's fight rang out far beyond the halls of Monroeville. Marcus's determination driving the pace. It's brutally harsh. His investigation eventually led him to Cole Harrington, the privileged son who had set this chain of events in motion. Cole, now living a life of quiet indulgence, had no idea the storm that was heading his way. Marcus followed him, biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came one rainy evening on the outskirts of Monroeville. The weight of justice is heavy, but it is a weight that must be borne. In the aftermath of the gala, as the world watched in disbelief, Marcus Johnson stood tall, the truth finally laid bare. The man who had wronged him, who had stolen 5 years of his life, was now exposed, arrested, and stripped of the power he had wielded with such arrogance. Beauregard Harrington's reign of injustice had ended. The fall of Judge Harrington was swift. In the days following Marcus's confrontation, the damning evidence surfaced, causing a media frenzy. The judge was arrested on charges of corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice. His reputation, built over decades of service, collapsed under the weight of his sins. What had once been a gilded career now crumbled into disgrace. But it wasn't just Marcus's fight that ended that night. In the courtroom where so many had witnessed his fall, a new voice emerged. Lily Harrington, the judge's own daughter, took the stand. With trembling hands but unshakable resolve, she testified against her father, revealing the full extent of his crimes. She spoke of the guilt that had haunted her, of the lies she had lived with, and the truth she could no longer deny. Her testimony was the final blow to her father's empire, and with it she found her redemption. For Marcus, the road to redemption had been long, but now, at last, he stood on solid ground. The case against him was officially overturned. The charges were expunged. Marcus was free to live the life he had always dreamed of. But he had no intention of leaving the past behind. No, his pain and suffering had forged something greater, a resolve to fight for others who had been wronged by a system designed to oppress. Marcus became a lawyer, dedicating his life to dismantling the very structures that had kept him imprisoned. He had always wanted to be a lawyer, but the justice he had imagined in his youth was far different from the one he now sought. It was no longer about winning cases. It was about exposing the lies, challenging the system, and ensuring that no one else would suffer as he had. His name had been cleared, but the scars on his soul would remain. They would remain, driving him forward. Though Marcus had won his battle, the war within him raged on, and so it was with a heavy heart that Lily visited him in the quiet solitude of his new office, a place that represented both the beginning of a new chapter and the weight of all that had come before. The tension rises as Lily enters. Lily stood in the doorway, her gaze faltering as she met Marcus's eyes. She had come to apologize, to atone for the years of silence and complicity. But Marcus wasn't sure if forgiveness was something he could give. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The betrayal ran too deep, the years too many. The quiet exchange between them is palpable as they speak for the first time since the chaos of the gallows. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered, her voice breaking. "I was blinded by my father's lies, by everything he promised me. I didn't know what he was capable of." Her words lingered in the air like a heavy sigh, but Marcus remained silent, his gaze distant. His mind was filled with the faces of the people who had suffered, who had died, because of the judge's actions. In that moment, there was something unspoken between them. A connection, yes, but also a vast distance. Marcus had spent 5 years in a prison of anger, of betrayal. And though Lily had opened her eyes to the truth, the damage done could not be undone in a single conversation. Lily reached out, her hand brushing his, a silent plea for him to see her differently. But Marcus pulled away gently, as if the touch might burn him. "Some wounds don't heal overnight," he said, his voice tinged with regret, yet firm in its finality. "Maybe one day, Lily, but not today." Lily stands there, her heart heavy, understanding what he meant. She nods, then turns to leave. There is no dramatic farewell, only the soft sound of the door closing behind her, a symbolic end to their chapter. The atmosphere shifts as the tension builds again, the narrator's voice cool and ominous. This trick feature was adopted by the FDA in the 80s, but Marcus's story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The moment cuts to a quiet, dimly lit room. A landline phone rings, the sound slicing through the silence. A man's voice answers, low and gravelly. "It's done, Harrington's gone." The voice on the other end pauses, then asks, "What about Johnson?" The response is chilling. "He's still a problem. Marcus Johnson hasn't learned the full extent of his fight. We'll handle him soon." As Marcus walked away from the wreckage of his past, he had no idea that darker forces were still at play, pulling the strings from the shadows. His victory was only the beginning of a new war, one where the stakes were higher than ever. What will Marcus face next? Will he uncover the full extent of the conspiracy that still threatens him? The battle for justice has only just begun, and in the shadows, the real fight is still waiting. Subscribe now, and stay tuned for part 2 of this gripping story. Justice is a journey, not a destination, and for Marcus Johnson, the road ahead promises more danger, more revelations, and more sacrifices. Are you ready to see what happens next?